situations we'd want to use one over the other. So basically, in my mind, it's a battle of robustness versus offense. So if I want to have a robust holding position where I want to hold an advantageous position over time, I prefer this hip chamber for the few reasons that I feel like, one, I have a better ability to control my partner's foot against resistance, whether it be something like this, whether it be here, so long as I can kind of keep this foot under control, as opposed to playing from a reverse shin on shin. I find that this is still decent control. However, it's going to be a lot less robust. However, it does provide us with the ability to much more easily and much more aggressively generate offense. Because from here, from the knee cut, like the name implies, reverse shin on shin knee cut, it's very interchangeable. So if I want to transition straight to passes, it's very easy and it's very readily available for me. Compared to when I'm in this leg trap position, when I start looking to try to go into offense, it's not immediately available to me and it's not immediately very threatening for my partner. Obviously, like let's say I go for a threatening Toriando, but I have to compromise position a fair bit. Similarly, if I bring my knee up and across, it does take a few transitions for me to get there in an effective manner. Similarly, if I'm just on my hip, it's great for holding and it's great for pressuring your partner, but not the best for generating offense. So understand your priorities in that regard. Another thing you have to take into consideration is just your partner's posture, because let's say their knees to the mat, like let's say they hip escaped, they've placed their knee to the mat. So let's circle a little bit more this way, where the knee's on the mat. This is when these types of reverse shin on shins are going to be more appropriate, because now when I try to occupy the space outside of their knee, it's occupied by the ground. So it's going to be difficult for me to actually go into that space. So that's when I'm going to go reverse shin on shin knee cut position. And then by nature of them maybe trying to defend, they try to push me away, recover, etc. I can start looking to occupy this space here. So outside of this offense versus maintenance question, we also have to take into consideration our opponent's body position. However, this is still something that you can kind of manipulate, right? Let's say I'm here and we're just entering the position. I can place more of an emphasis of moving across my partner to try to get their knee off of the mat, just to try to get into this hip post, especially if I feel as though my partner is very good at retaining their guard. So I want to be in a more robust position for the purpose of maintenance. So hopefully that makes sense. It's just like a nice contrast in regards to like how you might transition for in between reverse shin on shin and this kind of like leg trap, and then why you would do so. Okay, now so we're going to differentiate between the types of posts we can encounter in regards to the upper body. So basically we're going to break this down into two types of posts in regards to the upper body, where Lin can basically use a straight shoulder post, and he can straight shoulder post on both shoulders, one shoulder, etc. Or he can use these double shoulder posts or cross shoulder posts. Let's differentiate this a little bit, where a cross shoulder post is cross shoulder and a double shoulder post is when he uses his elbow to frame on both shoulders. So, I mean, the name should be relatively descriptive. However, understand that these are distinctly different, because if it's just one shoulder, like let's say he's just framing on a shoulder, my right shoulder can come into play and try looking to pressure into your partner, versus if it's a double shoulder post, right now, in terms of moving laterally, it's going to be more difficult. And we'll talk about thinking in like this type of up, down, left, right motion in regards to beating our frames a bit later. But understand that there's going to be a difference here, as well as a difference in how we look to approach these straight shoulder posts. And often these are going to be used in conjunction with other grips, right? Usually Lin's not just going to be using a far shoulder post by itself. He's not going to be using a straight shoulder post by itself. It's going to be maybe with the wrist grip, maybe framing on the knee, maybe framing on the hip. These are all options that we're going to have to consider. So the way we're going to look to approach dealing this is often going to be dictated by, first, how do we understand this situation? Because I can tell you a bunch of ways, okay, I like to deal with it this way, this way, this way, but first I want to take into I want to discuss some practical considerations and kind of outlining the differences. So just now we did talk about, off of this cross shoulder and double shoulder, the difference here. However, understand that also these types of frames operate at different ranges. So let's say, and we'll take this from like the furthest range to the closest range, where from here, we got a same side shoulder post, we got a far side shoulder post, we have a double elbow, like a double shoulder post, and then our partner can even make frames when we're chest to chest, where if I get chest to chest, they can even thumb post my armpit, right? So double thumb post, right, from here. And then this is still technically a frame. We won't really go over this right now, because this is more in regards to like pin retention and pin maintenance. However, a lot of the way I look to deal with these frames are dependent on how far I am, but also what risks does this distance pose to my partner. Because let's say Lynn's arm is fully extended and I'm very far away. This does give me better opportunities to access my partner's arms as levers. Versus if they're a lot closer, not as great of an opportunity. Just because there's less extension, it's a shorter lever for me to access. So generally when I encounter these like long types of shoulder posts, this is when like row drags and such are going to be super effective. This is when like this type of idea of leading edge with using my knee is going to be super useful, as well as like using this in conjunction with wrist grips and the stuff we discussed earlier. However, the closer we get, that's when we're going to have to think more in just, not in terms of accessing levers. We can, right, in terms of like turning these frames into levers as well. However, it's more going to be, okay, how can I maneuver my body? How can I stay close? Because I don't want to necessarily give up space at this point, because I've already closed distance. If I do move away, I risk my partner being able to regard. So we do have to be cautious with that a little bit. And so these are just the general factors that I like to consider. It's basically range and limb extension, and then we'll go into some more practical solutions in a moment. All right, so now let's talk about thinking in 4 directions in regards to beating our partner's frame, and especially in regards to this double shoulder post. So we talked about cross shoulder post, how we're still at a range where I can kind of turn my shoulders, and there's still access to the wrists, but this double shoulder post, things can be a little bit different. So the way I like to think about this is we're going to talk right now in relation to our partner's elbow and our, like basically their far elbow and our near shoulder. So in terms of thinking in like an upward and downward direction, once again, we're thinking about this in terms of changing the directionality of force, but how do we do that? We're moving our shoulder either above, like we said before, or below our partner's elbow. And we can use this as a means to beat our partner's frames. This is a fair bit more effective from like a knee cut position, but it's still very valid when we're in this outside flank position, right? Since he's framing, I want to find ways to beat my partner's frames. I want to be able to close distance, and often from here, this is going to elicit a reaction where he's trying to push away, and then this is when we're going to chain into all of our alternative options. And then if we feel as though, okay, we're trying to push him up, but then we feel like his elbow's coming down, right? We're trying to push him up. Elbow's coming down. Okay, then we bring our shoulder above our opponent's elbow. So let's change the angle slightly just so it's easier to see. Where he's framing on right now on my shoulder, I'm going to try and maneuver my shoulder either above or below. And we can play like a back and forth where it's not just one option, but we anticipate resistance, and as Lynn fights back, we play into one or the other. Then thinking in terms of laterally, then the way we're going to think about this is basically, where's our shoulder relative to their elbow, but now in this lateral direction, right? And the way I usually like to play around with this is not only exclusive to my shoulder, but also in conjunction with gripping, because this one I think gripping is going to be more important. When I'm framing and he's framing and I'm putting weight on him, if I can feel as though I can start looking to drive my shoulder to the outside of my partner's elbow, right? You see here? And then I can push him across. I'll often do this motion in conjunction with my forearm at my partner's tricep, accessing this lever. However, if we feel as though this is quite difficult, it's more or less retracted. What I'm going to look to do from here is I'm almost going to look to bring my shoulder back and expose my partner's wrist. Or I can start looking to make this wrist grip and start looking to push this wrist grip to my partner's chest. And the idea is I'm looking to aim to not just bring it to his chest, but the inside of his far shoulder, where I can almost look to pin his back to the mat. That's not necessarily my goal, especially when he still has his legs in between our upper bodies. But from here, when he's framing, trying to push across and he resists, I open up the space, I go for this wrist grip. I can basically start looking to close distance at the upper body, because now he only has one frame that's going to stop me. So even, let's say,